So, when you think Cyclops, what's the first image that pops into your head? It's a giant, right? A huge, ferocious, one eyed monster, probably lives in a cave, and is definitely not a fan of visitors. I mean, it's one of the most iconic creatures in all of Greek mythology.
Okay, let's just dive right in with the classic. This is how Homer describes Polyphemus, the most famous Cyclops of all time. He paints this picture of something that's not just monstrous, but not even really human, more like a piece of the landscape, a force of nature. This is the big bad from the story of Odysseus, the one we all think we know so well. And here's where things get really interesting. What if I told you that that man-eating giant is just one piece of a much bigger, much weirder puzzle? What if the real story of the Cyclopes is way stranger and more complex than you've ever imagined? So here's the big reveal right up front. The name Cyclops doesn't actually refer to just one type of creature. Nope. The ancient Greeks themselves told stories about three completely different groups, all sharing that one name. One name, but three totally separate myths. Let's break down these three families, so to speak. First up, you've got the Hesiodic Cyclopes. These guys were basically divine blacksmiths for the gods. Then you have the Homeric Cyclopes, the wild, savage shepherds like our friend Polyphemus. And last but not least, a mysterious third group, the primordial wall builders. So divine craftsmen, lawless brutes, and master engineers. Those are some pretty different resumes, right? Let's take a closer look at each one.
All right, let's kick things off with the OGs, the very first Cyclops mentioned in Greek mythology, way before Odysseus ever set sail. These are the Hesiodic Cyclops, and let me tell you, they are not monsters. Far from it. They're divine craftsmen, the master engineers of Olympus. So the ancient poet Hesiod tells us there were three of them, and they were the sons of Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. And their names? Well, their names tell you everything you need to know about what they did for a living. Brontes means thunder, Steropes means lightning, and Arges, bright or flash. These guys were literally born to create storms. And what did they make, you ask? Oh, just the most powerful and important weapons in the entire cosmos. When Zeus was waging war against the Titans, it was these Cyclopses who forged his mighty thunderbolt. They're also the ones who made Poseidon's iconic trident and even the helm of darkness for Hades that could make him invisible. These weren't just weapons. They were the very tools that helped establish the entire Olympian order. And Hesiod's description just hammers this point home. He talks about their skill, their contrivances. These were respected, incredibly powerful, and dutiful artisans. The absolute opposite of the lawless, cannibalistic giant that Odysseus would run into later on.
Okay, now let's jump forward in time and talk about the version of the Cyclops we're all familiar with. This is the Homeric Cyclops, the savage shepherd, living on the absolute fringes of civilization, totally off the grid. You see, for Homer, the Cyclopes were basically the embodiment of everything the ancient Greeks were not. Just look at this comparison. The Greeks valued laws and community councils. The Cyclopes had none. The Greeks were masters of farming and trade. The Cyclopes didn't even plant crops. And the biggest one, the Greeks held xenia, the sacred duty of hospitality, as one of their highest values. The Cyclopes, well, they saw guests as the evening's main course.
And this quote from the Odyssey just sums it up perfectly. It shows a society of radical individuals. There's no community, no cooperation, nothing. It's just each family unit isolated in its own cave, doing its own thing. They're the ultimate outsiders.
Okay, on to our third and final group. And this one's fascinating because it's where myth crashes right into the real physical world. Let's talk about the Cyclopean wall builders, the legendary masons of ancient Greece. So picture this. You're a Greek from, say, the 5th century BC, and you're wandering around the ruins of these much older Bronze Age cities, like Mycenae. You see these fortress walls made of colossal uncarved stones. I mean, some of these blocks weigh tons. There's no way you can imagine regular people lifting them. So what do you conclude? It had to be the work of giants. It must have been built by Cyclops. And get this, they even had a really cool nickname for these builder Cyclopes, gasterochires, which basically translates to belly hands. The idea was that they fed their bellies with the work of their hands. It's such a cool detail, right? It connects these mythical beings to the very real idea of hard manual labor. So we've got the smith, the shepherd, and the builder. Three very different jobs, but that still leaves one huge glaring question. Where did their most famous feature, that single central eye, actually come from? Well, the answer might not be in mythology books, but in natural history museums. Yeah,
This is the big one, isn't it? Forget what they did for a living for a second. Why one eye? What on earth could have inspired such a specific and, well, bizarre anatomical feature?
You know, the best clue we have doesn't come from some ancient poem. It comes from the Earth itself. For centuries, people living on Mediterranean islands like Sicily and Crete would occasionally dig up these enormous, really strange-looking fossilized skulls. And here it is, the dwarf elephant hypothesis. Back in 1914, a paleontologist named Athenio Abel put this idea forward. He suggested that the ancient Greeks were finding the skulls of these long-extinct dwarf elephants. Now, an elephant skull has this huge hole right in the middle of the forehead. It's the nasal opening for the trunk. But if you don't know that, what does it look like? It looks exactly like a single, massive eye socket. A monster literally born from a fossil. Now look, to be fair, there are some other theories floating around. Some people point to the fiery craters of volcanoes like Mount Etna, seeing them as a giant eye in the earth. Others suggest the idea came from blacksmiths wearing an eye patch to protect one eye from sparks. And there is a very rare birth defect actually called cyclopia. But you have to admit, that elephant skull theory is by far the most compelling. What's also amazing is seeing how even a specific character like Polyphemus wasn't static. He starts out in Homer's story as a terrifying man-eating monster. But a few hundred years later, other poets started writing about him as this kind of goofy, lovesick shepherd pining after a sea nymph. Then, by the time the Roman poet Ovid gets a hold of him, he's a full-blown tragic figure in a dramatic love triangle. The monster slowly became a character with feelings and heartbreak. So in the end, there is no one real Cyclops. The name is more like a label that got applied to different ideas over hundreds of years. It represented the awe the Greeks felt for divine power, their fear of the uncivilized world outside their cities, and it was their best explanation for the incredible engineering feats of their ancestors. And that really leaves us with one last thought, doesn't it? If the myth of a one-eyed giant could actually have its roots in a fossilized elephant skull, it just makes you wonder, what else is out there? How many other legends, griffins, sea serpents, dragons, are really just echoes of ancient discoveries, waiting for us to connect the dots? The line between myth and natural history might be a lot blurrier than we think.